The film begins by showing a surgeon named Bruno performing an operation on a patient. After the surgery, Bruno is seen walking home with his daughter, Jasmine, who asks about his job as a surgeon. Jasmine also looks proud of her father because his work has saved many lives. Upon arriving home, Jasmine, who is soon to have a birthday, asks her father to accompany her to deliver birthday party invitations to her friends. Bruno, too tired from work, tells Jasmine to ask her mother, Sylvie, to accompany her, but Jasmine refuses and decides to deliver the invitations on her own. Before she leaves to deliver the invitations, Bruno puts a jacket on his daughter and tells her to be careful. Sometime later, one of Jasmine's friends comes to the house and informs Bruno that Jasmine didn't come to school. Her friend thinks that Jasmine might be sick, but Bruno assumes that Jasmine might have returned home after delivering the invitations instead of going to school. After that, Bruno immediately calls out for Jasmine, thinking she might be in her room, but he can't find her anywhere. Because of this, Bruno and his wife quickly report this to the police, who come to their house to ask questions about Jasmine. Bruno and the police then search the neighborhood until they finally find her body at the edge of the forest. Bruno is devastated by his daughter's death, especially when he sees her body covered in wounds and blood. A few days after Jasmine's death, Bruno receives a phone call from Sergeant Mercure informing him that the police have arrested the prime suspect, a man named Anthony, who harassed and killed Jasmine based on the DNA and semen found on her body. Some time ago, Anthony had been arrested on suspicion of sexual assault, but the police reluctantly released him due to lack of evidence. Sylvie, watching the news about Jasmine's murder on TV, cannot hold back her tears and pours her grief out to her husband. Bruno tries to comfort his wife, although he can't hide his concern that Anthony might only receive a 25-year prison sentence, while they will remember Jasmine's tragic death for the rest of their lives. After that, Bruno attempts to distract himself from his sadness by going to work and suggests that Sylvie do the same. But she refuses because she still can't get over their daughter's tragic death. However, instead of going to the hospital, Bruno visits a cabin in the middle of the forest, where he takes a long-barreled rifle from a closet and prepares several things, as if he is planning something. Not only that, Bruno also appears to pay two men to do some work and instructs them to keep it a secret from everyone. That night, Sylvie confronts Bruno because she found out that he did not go to the hospital that day. Sylvie had called the hospital because she couldn't reach Bruno on his cell phone, but the hospital staff informed her that Bruno did not come to the hospital that day. Hearing this, Bruno chooses not to tell his wife anything, and Sylvie seems to already know about his plan, so she doesn't want to delve further into what her husband is planning. It turned out, Bruno intends to avenge his daughter's death because he cannot accept that the killer would only be imprisoned for 25 years. On the first day, Bruno deliberately follows a white van used by the police to transport Anthony to prison. During the journey, the white van suddenly loses control as the driver suddenly loses consciousness. Bruno then quickly approaches the white van and pretends to offer help by claiming he is a doctor. After he moves the driver to the side of the road, Bruno then drives away with the white van, while Anthony locked inside it. Soon after, Sergeant Mercure, who receives information about the incident, rushes to the location and finds Bruno's abandoned car on the side of the road. Mercure then goes to see Sylvie, informing her that Bruno has kidnapped Anthony and asks if she knows about her husband's plan. Sylvie then honestly replies that she knows nothing about Bruno's plan, but she also doesn't want to explain further about her husband. Knowing that Sylvie might be involved in the revenge plan, Mercure says that the police will tap her phone for their investigation. Sylvie just nods in agreement and then sinks back into her sadness over the death of her beloved daughter. Meanwhile, Bruno was seen sedates Anthony and transfers him to another car to erase any trace, ensuring the police can't track them. Soon after, Bruno arrives at the cabin in the middle of the forest, where he ties up Anthony and prepares everything to torture him there. Knowing that Bruno is Jasmine's father, Anthony pretends to cry and begs him to release him. Anthony claims he is not the killer and asks Bruno to wait for the trial, where he will prove his innocence. However, Bruno seems indifferent to his words, as he takes a hammer and strikes Anthony's knee with it. Elsewhere, Mercure is seen having dinner at home while watching CCTV footage of a robbery that occurred at a convenience store some time ago. The footage shows a woman being killed by the robber, and that woman was none other than his wife. On the second day, the police find CCTV footage showing a mysterious man visiting Anthony's house 2 days after his arrest. That night, Sylvie receives a phone call from Bruno, who reveals that he has kidnapped Anthony and crushed his knee. He then asks Sylvie to tell him the next steps. Knowing that the police have tapped her phone, Sylvie asks Bruno to stop and come home, but Bruno responds that she should understand his situation, especially since Sylvie is also deeply affected and somewhat blames him for their daughter's death. On the other hand, Mercure tries to persuade Bruno to stop his actions and surrender to the police. However, Bruno firmly stated that he would torture Anthony for 7 days, and on the 7th day, which was Jasmine's birthday, he would kill Anthony and then turn himself in to the police. Hearing this, Mercure tells Bruno about his wife being killed in a robbery 6 months ago and his decision to imprison the killer instead of seeking revenge. However, Mercure cannot answer when Bruno asks if he felt relieved after the killer was imprisoned, because in reality, Mercure still hasn't accepted his wife's death and continues to struggle with the personal tragedy of her loss to this day. Soon after that, Bruno ends the phone call, and the police are unable to trace it because the duration is too short. Bruno then returns to the cabin where he takes his rifle, intending to kill Anthony. However, Bruno doesn't have the courage to take a life since he has spent his life working hard to save others. After that, Bruno vents his frustration by firing a few shots to scare Anthony, then goes outside to calm down. On the 3rd day, the police are seen interrogating a man who helped Bruno kidnap Anthony, but the man insists he has no idea where he is now. The police also interrogate Bruno's colleagues at the hospital, who inform them that some medical equipment and drugs were stolen last week. The police then assume that Bruno stole them for his revenge plan. Meanwhile, Anthony finally confesses that he harassed and killed Jasmine while begging Bruno to stop. However, Bruno becomes even more enraged after hearing the confession and continues to torture Anthony, whipping him repeatedly until he loses consciousness. On the other hand, Mercure and his team are frustrated because they hit a dead end in their investigation to find Bruno's hideout. One of his men suggests that Anthony deserves the torture because he committed a series of sexual assaults and violence but was never caught due to lack of evidence. However, Mercure states that he does not intend to save Anthony but wants to prevent Bruno from committing a crime because he knows Bruno is a good man who just wants justice for his daughter. On the 4th day, Bruno checks Anthony's condition and decides to give him an 4 because his body is too weak. Bruno then watches the news on television and angrily calls his wife, yelling because Sylvie told reporters that he might have lost his sanity after their daughter's tragic death. The couple then vents the anger they have been holding back, starting to blame each other for their daughter's death. Meanwhile, the police, who are tapping their conversation, finally find clues about Bruno's hideout and continue their investigation to the location. Soon after that, using his experience and skills as a surgeon, Bruno begins torturing Anthony as if he were operating on his patients. Placing a photo of Jasmine on Anthony's body, Bruno starts to cut open his abdomen to damage his digestive system. On the 5th day, after performing the surgery, Bruno appears distraught and frustrated, repeatedly trying to calm himself and vent his anger. His reaction shows that Bruno is not a cold-blooded man like Anthony, who could still remain calm and smirk after brutally harassed and killing Jasmine. Knowing that Bruno is a kind-hearted man, Anthony begins to taunt and mentally intimidate him. Anthony also reveals that he has harassed and killed 3 little girls before Jasmine, listing their names one by one. Additionally, he mocks Bruno by saying that his daughter was the most beautiful among his victims. As Anthony is about to tell Bruno more details about Jasmine's murder, Bruno, unable to contain his rage, begins to strangle Anthony, intending to kill him. However, Bruno once again cannot bring himself to take a life, even though this person brutally killed his daughter. After calming himself down, Bruno calls Mercure to inform him about the names of Anthony's other victims, but Mercure and his team manage to trace Bruno's phone and rush to the location. Surprisingly, Bruno deceives the police by using a laptop and another phone to make the call from a remote location, allowing him to move freely and cover his tracks. While stopping at a gas station, the attendant seems to recognize Bruno even though he tries to conceal part of his face with a hat. The woman then touches Bruno's hand and tells him that she supports what he is doing. On the 6th day, the families of Anthony's other 3 victims are interviewed by a television station. 2 of them strongly support Bruno's actions to torture Anthony, the cruel man who brutally killed their daughters. However, a woman named Diane, the mother of one of Anthony's victims, expresses her disapproval of Bruno's actions because it revives the trauma of her daughter's death 4 years ago. It turned out, Diane has been trying to move on by letting go of her only daughter's death, but Bruno's actions have brought back her painful memories, and now she has to face that nightmare again. At the same time, while watching the interview, Bruno becomes furious and calls someone to get Diane's home address. That very night, Bruno kidnaps Diane and takes her to his hideout. Seeking justification for his actions, Bruno drags Diane and forces her to confront the man who killed her daughter. Bruno then orders Diane to kill Anthony to avenge her daughter's death, but she refuses. Consequently, Bruno locks Diane up with the severely injured and helpless Anthony. Shortly after, Bruno releases Diane, but she blames him for reviving her trauma over her daughter's death. Diane says that she had erased the man's existence from her life, but Bruno has destroyed that. Enraged, Bruno punches Diane until she passes out, then abandons her by the roadside, while he returns to the cabin and begins venting his frustration and anger by destroying the objects around him. Diane, having regained consciousness, asks a passing driver for help and is taken to the police station. After receiving information from Diane, Mercure gathers his team to track down Bruno's hideout, as he fled using Diane's car. On the 7th day, which is Jasmine's birthday, Bruno, still under the influence of alcohol, sees Jasmine's figure standing before him in the state she was in when she died. Bruno then unties the ribbon from Jasmine's wrists and cleans her body of dust and blood because he wants Jasmine to look beautiful on her birthday. However, the wounds and blood on her body are impossible to clean, so Bruno can only cry while holding his beloved daughter's hand tightly, remembering their last moments together. Meanwhile, the police finally locate Bruno's hideout, and reporters are already gathered around the area. At the same time, Bruno tells Anthony that today is Jasmine's 9th birthday, and they should have been celebrating it happily, but Anthony took his daughter's life and destroyed their lives. But unexpectedly, Bruno decides to unlock Anthony's handcuffs and let him live, then surrenders to the police without any resistance. After that, Bruno is arrested on charges of kidnapping and attempted murder, but he has the right to remain silent and appoint a lawyer to defend him in court. Bruno then tells Mercure that he did not kill Anthony, and Mercure seems somewhat relieved to hear this, although he still cannot condone Bruno's actions of torturing Anthony and kidnapping Diane. As the police take him away, a reporter asks Bruno if he still believes that revenge is the right thing to do. Bruno does not respond, and when asked if he regrets his actions, he remains silent. No one will ever fully understand the suffering and inner conflict that Bruno experienced, not even his wife, Mercure, or Diane, who have also lost their loved ones tragically. Even though he can never forgive Anthony for the rest of his life, Bruno's decision not to choose the path of death proves that he, at least, still has a sense of humanity within him. Moral lesson from the story: never trust a surgeon with party invitations. You might end up lost in the woods. Remember, revenge might seem sweet, but it doesn't bring back birthday cakes or daughters.